All right, and I will give us the official introduction for the evening. So welcome everyone to Project Citizen Curriculum in Focus. And today's feature is on developing action plans. If I've not met you before, my name is Emily Voss. I am the Senior Manager of National Programs and Professional Development at the Center for Civic Ed. And in just a moment, I'm going to hand things over to our guest presenter for the evening. But just to give a brief kind of arc of where we've come so far. So our first session, we talked a bit about the Project Citizen program in broad terms. We talked about kind of why it was important and how to fit it into your curriculum, no matter what you're teaching. And then we've kind of moved from there to more of the structural elements of Project Citizen. So we've talked about students selecting a subject matter of interest to them to study for their selected project. And then the last session, we talked about how we can use the resources of our community with elected officials who can serve as both sources of information as well as champions of student projects as well. So today we have worked ourselves into the action plan phase of Project Citizen. And this one is really important and one that the students don't necessarily take the time and effort to put together in a way that would help them think through their project very logically and logistically. So our guest presenter this evening, Cheryl Cook-Callio, I'll let her introduce herself more in just a moment, but she is a true champion of Project Citizen, and she has so many wonderful years of experience with this program, and it has been truly life-changing for her, as well as for many, many of her students. So with that, let me go ahead and hand things over to Cheryl to kick us off into action plans.
Thank you very much. And first of all, everybody can hear me because I have AirPods on. Okay, great. First of all, thank you so much for asking me to do this. This is like one of my favorite things to talk about. I taught in a service learning high school, and basically all of our projects, and this is like for the last 40 years, have been centered around the structure that's presented in Project Citizen. But I also used to use it in elementary and junior high school. So I am going to share my screen, and we can talk about this.
Give you this.
Can everybody see my screen? Yes, great. And all the other junk that I have on it. Okay, play from start. All right, so I went back into the text and I thought, well, where are you going to find this in the table of contents? And there's nothing there that says developing an action plan. However, it is the most important thing, I think, for your portfolio. That doesn't mean that it has to be overly complicated, but you not only you do want kids to recognize that once you identify a project, you have to do something about it, because we all know people that do nothing but complain. So just so that you know, my definition of civics is it's not just the facts defining the government, but it's applying that information in a way that contributes to the community. In my personal experience, it is the most important aspect of this for the students for a couple reasons. It could be the most frustrating because they can't get any traction on it, or it could be the most illuminating because they were way more successful than they thought they were going to be. But this is all about process. The whole thing is about process, whether they're wildly successful at the end of this or whether they have experienced some frustration with elected officials, and we all have had those kinds of frustrations with elected officials. It gives them an idea of how to access people and, where you can get the most help. Okay, so I am a retired teacher. I taught for 40 years. I am the California State Coordinator. I also serve as a board member for the Center for Civic Education. I look at myself also as first and foremost, as a teacher. I think I'm a community activist. I'm also an elected official. I've been on a city council and I currently serve on a county school board. So not only am I somebody who promoted this with my students from from the beginning of my career. I started myself when I was in high school, but I've also been on the other side of it when I've gotten requests from kids and that sort of thing. And my students will tell you that there was a point where I had to put my money where my mouth was. So um, that's how I got here. As soon as any man says, what does it matter to me? The state is lost, right? Why should I get involved? As a paraphrase of Rousseau, and that's the social contract, as you all well know. It's that contract between the government and the citizens in terms of how the government is supposed to help us. Now, I'm going to tell you a very quick story. Years ago, I took, I don't know, 12, 15 teachers up to Sacramento as a culmination of a JMLP project. And two of those teachers were people either I had worked closely with and trained, or somebody had been a former student. And they couldn't believe how many people talked to me as I walked through the halls. Hello, hi Cheryl, how are you? It was all day. We ended up seeing like 7 to 9 legislators, including the speaker. And they were just their eyes were like saucers. And so I said to them, how many of you have ever called an elected official and invited them to your class? Zero, except for the two people that I had trained or worked with. Zero. And they were middle of their career government teachers. They had never contacted somebody in state government at the local level, at the county level, at the state level. And I asked them why. I was stunned. I asked them why, and they said, well, they're so busy, but they're supposed to be busy helping you. That's what their job is. They're busy doing other stuff, then that's not what their job is. And the reason I was successful with knowing these people is because way back when I first started teaching and was first exposed to Project Citizen, I picked up the phone and I invited the mayor to come speak to my kids. I invited the school board to come speak to my kids. And let me tell you, any elected likes that opportunity, especially in an election year, because they want that picture with the kids, right? So they are going to respond. But the number of people who just don't think they should do that is astounding to me. And I do recognize that in some areas, the environment may not be as friendly as others. But, if you ask politely, the worst they're going to say is no. They know your voters too. And so what you can't get to the action plan until you've done all these other major things, having identified the problem, done a significant amount of research, identify what has been tried or what is in process to solve the problem. Very often, and this is adults, this is not just kids, but adults will say this should happen, but they haven't bothered to ask the question whether or not A, the council, the county, or whomever, have they done anything on this? And B, what that might be, where are they in the process? And then you tailor your action plan so you can contribute to that solution. I often would, when I taught this part of it in terms of teaching kids how to figure out what their action plan should be, oftentimes they'll pick homeless, right? You try to kind of scoot it down so it's more local. And they'll say, well, we're going to give them toothpaste. Well, how do you know they need toothpaste? Well, everybody needs toothpaste. How do you know they don't have toothpaste? You have to ask the question, what is needed? Your action plan should address what is needed. It should not repeat information or effort that's already been expended. And it also shouldn't be what the kids want to do. It should be whatever that agency or that problem or that whatever the issue is, you want to address what they need, not what the kids need. That's a very hard shift for the kids. But in a service learning school, we'd say to them, you need to ask the question, what do you need? And so without the significant amount of research, without the interviews, without identifying whether or not people have ever even thought of the problem, sometimes you'll hit on a problem where people have just been ignoring it, in which case you kind of have an open template in terms of what to try. But those things are very important before you even get to the action plan. Doesn't mean that they can't think of things that they'd like to do as they're going through the process. But in this situation with the students as well as adults, very often you have to shift at certain portions or certain places in this process to kind of accommodate some information that you received. Maybe they can't do it because they're not 18. Maybe there is no capacity for a nonprofit or for a government agency like a school to contribute. Those are all things that you hope to find out, but you may have to readjust at some point. Now, what is an action plan? This story is one of my favorite stories. It's a way to implement the solution to the identified problem. And we used to have a rule in our household. Kids, kids came home to complain, and I would say, what do you want to do about it? Because we all complain. The hard part is trying to figure out what we can do to help. And in this particular case, if you're connecting this to the Constitution, it is what the First Amendment refers to as petitioning the government. And that is, it's not just the kids think it's a petition where everybody signed their name, but it's actually addressing the government, asking them to do something. So this is a picture of some seniors who did We the People, I think 2 years ago in Bakersfield, Kevin McCarthy's district. They wanted to get some student representatives on their school board. That is not uncommon in California. It is provided for in the Ed Code. But they had been kind of put off, like, they were answering their questions. They had a lot of people that allowed them to be interviewed, that allowed the interview to happen, but they kept pushing it off on the schedule till after these kids graduated. But the kids, were also We the People kids. So they figured out what was going on and decided they were going to hang in there and see what they could do. So they did everything. They took a survey with all the high schools in the area. They had a couple of suggestions about how to choose a student board member. They had gone to school board members themselves. They had contacted the state superintendent of instruction. They had done all their homework. The problem was they kept pushing the meeting to after these kids graduated. And but they hung in there, and they presented their findings to the school board at the end of June, almost a full month after they've graduated from high school, and they were successful. The school board voted to allow student board members, and they used one of the suggestions that the students had made for how to choose that board member and how to rotate it among the schools. And I was pleasantly surprised that they were so successful. But you don't know what's going to happen with this. You don't know whether the kids are going to be successful, and the broader they cast their net, particularly when you have middle school kids, they go too far outside the local area. It sometimes becomes very difficult to even access people. Far easier now that we have Zoom, but in the olden days when I first did this, the kids used to call and ask the electeds to come to our school because they couldn't drive yet. They were 8th graders. And they'd say, when can you meet? And they'd suggest a time. And then the next thing, well, could you come here? Because I can't, I can meet with you during my class period, but I can't drive to where you're at. And amazingly enough, people were very good about doing that. Now it's not so hard to see face to face with a Zoom. Okay, at this point, when they've identified the problem, most students will be able to tell you what's wrong, but not how to fix it. And they also aren't, particularly if they're younger, they're not, well, even adults don't understand the revenue stream, like who pays for this stuff. Who is the particular government agency that is in charge of this? I had a parent once call me about a lockdown at the school, and she wanted to talk to the mayor. And I said, why do you want to talk to the mayor? This is a school issue. It didn't occur to her to go to the superintendent. If you think an adult would make that mistake, I guarantee you a student will. Or they'll want to write their congressman about the crosswalk in front of their school. So there needs to be a significant amount of education in terms of the layers of government and what federalism is. And, we, at least I do, recommend that you try to keep it within your county. Although I've known people that have gone to the state legislature. Yes, you have a question?
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So I am new to my school district, and I am new to doing Project Citizen. And the vision that my principal has, which I think is a great vision, but yet I think it's a little ambitious for the students that I'm dealing with, because that's a pretty rough little rural area. Behavior has been a real issue, but I've seen like a lot of gains because of this program, what we've been doing. But his vision is, and I'm not trying to go against what he's saying, I'm just wondering if this is realistic. His vision is to the first, because we're in trimesters, the first trimester, we're looking at something local. So for the most part, my kids are looking at the school community, I do have one group looking at homelessness, and it's in the neighboring town that some of the kids live in. And they've actually like really gone far with this. But he's also looking like the second trimester would go a little larger, like maybe in our state or our county. And he's hoping that the last trimester we would be even larger. And I'm thinking, because the kids are asking me, well, how would we do that? It's not like we're going to go to the president or something like, and I'm thinking, well, we do have senators not far from us that we could invite to come to our school. I mean, are we being realistic here or?
You know, I mean, my one of the things that I say to teachers say, oh, you know, we can't do this because, you know, my kids won't do it, is that this is a time where they get to own what they're doing. And so I always tried not to put a ceiling on it. I tried to get them to focus. And so using your example of, say, homelessness, and you first look at it locally. Well, the first thing could be actually doing something. Your action plan could be working with a nonprofit to provide sandwiches. I'm just, you know, pulling things out of my head. Well, the second trimester, you want to go a little wider. It could be taking that same problem and identifying which organizations in the county actually address homelessness and how could they help. And then the third trimester, you could certainly go wider than that and say, we have seen this locally and this is what's needed. We have seen this countywide and this is what needed. Now we are going to write letters to our senator, to our congress member, or have them visit so we can tell them what we have found out and legislation that we'd like to see passed in order to solve this problem, because homelessness doesn't happen just down the street, it happens everywhere. And so if you're using that as an example, I can see where you could do that, and use it as a way to teach how government interacts with each other. I think that would be wonderful. I think that the hardest thing about a project like this is for the teacher to get out of the way. Now,
So I just want to add, you're approaching this in a different way than I was even thinking. I was thinking that because some of these kids, they kind of feel like, okay, we're kind of done with our topic and we'd like to do something different and they'd like to change up their groups. So I was thinking that that's what we'd end up doing. But I never thought of that. Like if they wanted to stay in their group and stay on their topic, they could expand it that way. That's an option I can offer. So like some could mix it up and some could stay focused on that one subject that they're focusing on. Okay, thank you.
and you're welcome. I also will point out that, you know, I when I first did this, I was blown away at what my students did. I was, and at the time I taught in a very affluent area, and it was the moment in time when I realized kids were learning for the sake of learning. That is the most powerful thing for a teacher. In addition to that, there was a I'm in California. There's a confab in Sacramento probably 5 or 6 years ago. And the president of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce was talking about how this kind of project is what helped the achievement gap, because all of a sudden these students who weren't doing their English assignment, they weren't reading and they weren't really caring about history, all of a sudden saw the connection in terms of why understanding written word was important, why knowing how to write a good email was important, how to talk on the telephone. They actually went door to door in their advocacy, and it changed the trajectory of these students' lives. And that's what we want. We want education to be something that that gives the kids options, that gives them choices, that gives them some vision. And so you just illustrated some of the roadblocks you might find in a school. Your principal seems to have embraced this and wants more out of it than maybe the vision was initially, but we all adjust, right? But you'll have some that don't want to touch it because they're afraid of the political ramifications of getting the kids involved. And that's, I think, short-sighted. And if any of you ever come, or anybody ever hits that point, you're welcome to contact me directly for specific help with that, because I navigate both sides of that. I'm a political animal in my elected office, and I'm also a teacher at heart. And so to your point also, how long will this take in terms of how you do this in the classroom? I don't suggest ever doing a project like this in like a week or a 2-week period, because elected officials are horrible at getting back to you right away. Sometimes they need to be touched a couple of times, or they mean to get back to you and they don't, or it's 11 o'clock at night and the kid is not available. And so to build it in like a 1 or 2 day a week thing over a period of time gives kids a chance to do that scheduling and that research without being on a deadline, because we all know in any kind of elected office, things take longer than you think they're going to take. This will also. And then finally, I'm going to tell you that what if the action plan is not successful? In real life, that happens all the time. People set out to solve a problem and hit a roadblock. And it doesn't mean that we stop trying to help. It means that we just shift and do something else. It's important for the kids to understand that if the project isn't as successful as they had imagined it, it doesn't mean that they themselves were not successful. I mean, it isn't, in fact, a success to do all this research. It's a success to contact an elected official and have a conversation. All of this is part of learning, and it's part of how we operate as an adult when we're trying to get things done in government. So the steps toward an action plan, it's all about process. You've done the top 3 things that I have listed here already. The action plan can take a variety of forms. The kids may think they're going to only write letters, and then you end up getting someone in an office that grabs onto this and says, oh, I want to talk to this kid, and it ends up being something larger. They may want something larger, but in the time they have, they only got back a letter saying we'll look into it. That's stuff that you can't control. So you have to manage their expectations and focus constantly on the fact that this is about process. This is about learning how to be a citizen and how to influence public policy. It's not necessarily being successful all the time. I sit on an elected body. I'm not successful all the time. I try, but I'm not successful, and I know what I'm doing. So it's not. Sometimes it's out of their control. So the first thing when you start looking at your problem, and since we were talking about homelessness and a trimester system, I'm going to continue to use that as an example. You look at this and you think, well, who's responsible for homelessness? Well, the school principal isn't, but he has to deal with the consequences of homelessness. So maybe there's a school thing there. The superintendent and the school board, similar thing. They may not be responsible, but we have foster children in our system. Of course, that's private information, but that doesn't mean kids don't need services at the school. The mayor or city council might be more specifically responsible for the homeless in the community, and then of course the county board of supervisors. Again, the closer these people are to the students, the more apt they are to get a response. That doesn't mean, I believe it was Maine one year set in a portfolio, and it included a interview with Angus King, who is their senator. So it happens, particularly in a smaller state. Okay, so what we have in America is not government by the majority. We have government by the majority who participates. And, I used to say to my husband, you've got a choice. My students too. You can either be the receiver of directions or the giver of directions. And, as well know by looking around in your community, that, you don't get 100% participation. But that participation isn't static either. The percentage moves, it ebbs and flows depending on the issue. But kids need to understand that if they don't participate, it's hard to get anything done, and you have to know how to do that. Okay, so in terms of your action plan, you need to come to some kind of consensus in the allotted time. It's helpful if you can identify an ally, and this could be a local elected official, it could be your principal, it could be another teacher, it could be a parent who knows elected officials. You want to meet with stakeholders, people that are being affected. It's very important, but also people that can contribute to the solution. You need to be open to the alternative. You don't want the kids to say, but I wanted to give them toothpaste. They don't need toothpaste, they need socks, right? So you've got to be open to whatever the alternative is. And you have to have a plan about how you're going to accomplish the goal. And then you need to get to work. Obviously, if it's something that corresponds to a nonprofit or some other agency that's already doing it, that makes the work a little easier for students. But I will tell you the story. This is a fifth grade class. Um, they were upset about the amount of bond money that was being used and how it was being used. Now, you wonder, how did these kids know what the bond money was? Well, obviously, their parents had been talking about it at home. And so they didn't like what it was being used for. And in California, bond money was capital improvement. They wanted a new soccer field because they couldn't use the field because it had gopher holes in it and kids were breaking their ankles. So they did all this wonderful stuff. They marched the kids down. The superintendent met with the superintendent. Superintendent was um, pretty disingenuous. He listened to him, bobbed his head up and down, patted him on the head, and said no. Kind of pushed them off on their way. Kids came back. They were furious. They were furious because he just said, no, we can't do it. And so the teacher, very smart, said, well, is the superintendent the final word here? Do some research. No, it's the school board. So then they decided to go to a public meeting and do the presentation in front of the school board. And the upshot of this is they got their soccer field, and so did every other elementary school in the district, because there is a law that allows you to reallocate funds if they find a better use for it. So these fifth graders not only got their soccer field, but they got one for everybody else. And it was only because they asked the question, teacher asked the question, is this the end of the road? Who else is in charge here? Now, they could have gone to the school board and gotten the same answer, but they were so passionate about what they wanted that they pursued it and were very successful. So, things like that do happen. So I've mentioned before, to keep it as local as possible, the process itself is important. And founders believed that what made a participatory citizen is access to good public education. And that's what we want. We want kids who can take what they've learned in school and apply it to real life. For students, ease of access equals better success. Utilize local government agencies. You might want to call the mayor because you think the mayor is in charge, and only find out that this really needs to go to the operations center in the city. What a local elected could do for you in that area is to connect you with the person that could be the most helpful. And so, be open to the fact that the person that's most helpful to you isn't necessarily an elected official. Take advantages of the resources in the text, the forms that talk about how to do an interview, how to approach elected officials or any other person in authority. Students need to be taught how to make that ask and how to follow up. And I will venture to say adults need to also. It's very unlikely that you're going to get the help you need if you're screaming at the elected official. They don't hear it very well when it happens. So let's look at the different layers here. So our ideas: we would like a patio cover for outdoor eating. The person who's likely to be able to help you there is probably the principal. And this is, if you're teaching elementary, doing something like this that benefits a school site is very accessible to kids. It's true for middle school and high school also, but it doesn't require the students to leave campus. And in some cases, that's a problem. So again, the more local it can be, the better. Would like a new soccer field. Well, maybe you go to the superintendent, the school board, because that's a money issue. And even though the patio costs money, the principal probably has a slush fund that could pay for the patio cover. You'd like a crosswalk in front of the school. That's a city council issue. Would like to clean up the county watershed next to the school. Would typically be a county board of supervisors, or whatever your designation is for that level of government. I recognize that different areas use different terms for this, but the kids need to figure out, with your help, and sometimes that is a phone call, calling and saying, who's in charge of this? And then pursuing it. Always, if you can get an ally outside the school to help you and to help mentor the kids, it's an advantage. Okay, so how to make the ask. This is one of my favorite stories. I had a student who was working with the Tribune in Oakland. It's now a defunct newspaper. He was following how the media was addressing a particular issue. the guy he was working with that was helping him, and was kind of helping him figure out what he was going to do with this information, would answer a phone call all the time, but never an email. Never an email. And so the kid was a straight A student, couldn't figure out what he was doing wrong. And so finally I looked at him and I said, what email address are you using? And I kid you not, this was a conservative Muslim kid who said, Mr. Pimpman 89. Of course they weren't answering the email. The kid didn't have a professional email. And I said to him, I wouldn't answer that email either. And as soon as it came out of his mouth, he went, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I said, well, lucky for you, he probably just deleted them all, but the kids need help with that. And part of it is they may not even be able to get responses to their school email because you may have a filter on your school email. And so you really need to help them create some kind of professional email that, that will allow them to have a communication channel with whomever. But even my email often doesn't go to all the teachers I send it to. I have to be very cognizant of the fact that it doesn't contain my name when I'm writing as a coordinator, and it doesn't show up. So, in terms of calling the agency, the reason I would say to call is because sending an email is like sending it into a hole. You don't, if you haven't called also, you have no way of knowing whether the person even got it or opened it. So I tell the students to use a formal address. They are Mr. or Ms. Person tells you to call them Emily, call them Emily, but always start out with a formal address. When you call, ask for the person that's responsible for crosswalks in the city. Who would I talk to if I wanted a crosswalk? Write that person's name down and ask for their email, then ask to leave a voice message and follow the voice message up with a specific email. So, hi, Mr. Smith. I go to Irvington High School and we'd like a crosswalk because, kids are in danger crossing the street. And I'd like to discuss this with you. And just so that you have more specifics, I'm going to follow this up with an email. And could you, either reply to the email or contact me at this phone number. In that particular case, you've contacted the person twice. The person has gotten a voicemail and an email, and maybe even a written a message from the person answering the phone. And you might want to create space for the students to practice. They don't do this kind of stuff in real life. And keep in mind, they'll eventually have to call Xfinity too. So, having some perseverance and understanding how to actually manage voicemail is really important. So in the email, they need to be specific. They want to indicate how to get best in touch with them. They want to include a phone number and include the school and the teacher's name. Do not start the email out by saying, hi, I'm Susie Smith from Irvington, and I have to do this project that I really don't want to do. And I'm being forced to contact you because I won't pass the class if you don't. I guarantee you that that's going to go into a hole somewhere. So they have to be passionate about the topic. And if there is no reply, follow it up with an email expressing the fact that the person is busy and maybe they can't help you, but would they suggest someone who might? That by the time you've done that third step, you've now touched them 3, maybe 4 times. In most cases, 90% of the time, you'll get an answer from someone. And you want to use their specific email. You don't want to use citycouncil@gmail because that goes, honest to goodness, that stuff goes into a hole. info@Congress goes into a hole. You really want the specific email. Okay, what not to do? Hey, bro, can you help me out here, dude? Don't talk to people like that. You don't want to say the only reason you're doing it is for a school project. Don't be a pest. Recognize that these people are busy. I often get 200 emails a day. I can't possibly keep up with all of that. Most people will try to reply within 24 hours, but give them 4 or 5 days before following up. Give them some time, and then don't give up too soon. There may be multiple levels to which you can appeal. again, this, I think it's all about process, but the kids need to practice doing this, and there's help for you in the textbook for that. Okay, so example of actions. You can write letters containing your research and your ask. You may or may not receive a reply. I was doing cohort 1 or cohort 2, I guess, of PCRP, and a city manager came in and was showing examples of emails that worked, emails that didn't work. And I mean, some of them were literally, you work for me and you need to do this now. And I'm tired of calling you, and I'll delete. It probably doesn't get deleted, but the quickness in the response is not really there. Then he puts up this email at the end and he said, this resulted in change. And at the end, he told us it was written by an 11th grader at a high school. You would have never known that came from an 11th grader. But she had all her research up there. She had what she had done before, and then had a specific ask. This is what you can do. And it resulted in staff, falling over themselves trying to do something. Meeting in person, and in person could be via Zoom, face to face. You'll get some immediate feedback from an individual. Presented a public meeting, they get recorded, it's in public. There's, even if the city council doesn't respond to you immediately, a staffer might come up and say, let me help you with this. And the public will have the benefit of your research. And don't mistake this. People love it when kids come before them and they've done their homework. And you'll often get comments like, I really, really wish that adults would take what you've just done and pay attention to it when they come before me. I see there's about 5 people in the chat. Are there any questions there that people have that?
Hey, Cheryl. Yeah, so there are really good comments and suggestions, including that sometimes elected officials take vacations. So there is the very real possibility that your communication with them might not actually get to them today. I do have some questions for you. Would you ever recommend that as the teacher that students need to show you first any communications they are intending to send? Like, do you basically serve as the gatekeeper ever?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. And it depends on what level they're at, right? Is that the older they are, the longer I've had them, the less likely I am to hover over them. Because I know that they've had training in this. Again, I taught at a service learning high school. I knew that they had training elsewhere. But to have them write practice letters or to create templates, I think is important. I think that as an elected official, if I get an email that's obviously cut and pasted and somebody's put my name in it and then just blotted out the other thing and wrote their name, I kind of doesn't mean though that the comment isn't appropriate. And for young people that are learning how to do this, there's even more forgiveness in terms of doing that. But I think giving an outline saying in the first paragraph, identify yourself, what school you're from, who your teacher is, and what you're studying. Second paragraph, maybe the research. And the third paragraph, what are you asking that person for? You're asking them for an interview, or you're asking them for help or contacts or whatever. And then make it succinct enough so the person isn't going to have to take 25 minutes to read it. And check the spelling, please. Which I thankfully did on my PowerPoint before today because I found 2 spelling errors. Anything else?
Yes. So to what extent do you have students think through contingencies? Or, do you allow the students to kind of play out their plan and, they're going to try to ask elected official, city councilor, we're going to try this, avenue, and only if that person doesn't respond do we then start thinking about plan B or plan C, or do you encourage the students to have plan A, B, and C up front?
That's a difficult question because it depends on what the issue is, right? And so if it is one issue with various paths, you have 30 plus kids in your classroom. You could have group A look at the first alternative, group B look at the second alternative, group C look at the third. Sometimes the kids will be adamant that they are going to do this no matter what, that they think it's important. And because the whole purpose of this is process, and in a process situation, you don't always get an affirmative answer at the end. I think if kids are that passionate about it, to let them, um, work it out. And after a while, if they become very frustrated, to then suggest an alternative, I think is perfectly appropriate. But I think that teachers and students are often focused on the final outcome of something, and not necessarily the learning that takes place to get to that outcome. And this is all about that process. I'll give you another example. A group of kids, this was not a Project Citizen project, but it was exactly Project Citizen that somebody had just figured out on their own. There was a school board member that wanted to shut down flavored vaping in Alameda County, and was getting nowhere with adults, nowhere. And she's a school board member, but she wasn't a school board member at this time. She happened to be talking to an 8th grader who said, "Oh gosh, that's terrible. That's awful. We shouldn't do that." He said, "I'm going to go to the city council." Well, his brother was on a We the People team. He set up a group of kids that, instead of each one getting up and talking for 2 minutes, they created a long testimony. So student 1 would read for 2 minutes, student 2 would read for the next 2 minutes, student 3 would read for the next 2 minutes. And so they created an essay, pretty much, where they got about 15 minutes worth of time by just passing the essay off to the person behind them. This took fire in Alameda County, and we have 13 cities here. And at the end of that school year, all 13 had voted to keep flavored vaping out of their communities. And our particular community, they were going to vote 5-0 to pass it, and they flipped the entire council to a 5-0 the other way. And so, again, I wouldn't have thought that was going to fly, but I'd have been wrong. So sometimes just not talking for a while, let the kids work it out a little bit, and then maybe give them a little nudge here and there, is helpful. But they are, in many cases, they will perform in ways that surprise you, but shouldn't, because we've been teaching them to do this kind of stuff for years. We just haven't given them a vehicle to influence the outside community.
That's great. Okay, so I have one other question or element or wrinkle, I guess, to introduce, and that would be situations, and this is fully dependent on the problem that the students select.
Mm-hmm.
Situations where the potential resolution of the student's problem introduces other problems that will need resolution. So how have you helped students think through that in your experience? And if you'd like, I can provide you an example.
I might have you provide me an example. I mean, for every action, there's a consequence, right? And sometimes there are unintended consequences, and government deals with that all the time. I mean, we went to a top 2 primary in California thinking that we were going to end up with more competitive seats throughout the state. And instead, we have everybody's a Democrat. I mean, it just has knocked all the Republicans off the ballot. That was not an intended consequence of that particular law, but it was a result of it. And what it has happened is it's caused, as much as there's times I agree with what's going on, it's also eliminated some civil discourse that would be important for a better product. And that's why you want that conversation. And so to that end, and then I want to hear your example, having that conversation about that chain reaction event that happens when you take action is an important part of the process. So definitely. What is your example?
Okay, so the example that was submitted as one of last year's showcase projects had to do with high school students that wanted to have the start of the school day be moved later. And they presented all sorts of science as to why this was better for, high school students' brains to be able to start the day later. But I did actually appreciate that as they worked through the process, they thought through, okay, one of the things that needs to happen in order for a later school day is that the bus schedule will need to change. And if the bus schedule changes, what does that mean for younger students? And if younger students are not able to get on the bus at a certain time, what does that mean for childcare? So they were basically anticipating, I think, potential roadblocks to their solution, but also at the same time recognizing that their solution would introduce other problems. um, so anyway, I realize that that's a high school project, and that's certainly a very complex way of thinking about it. But I guess I was curious if you had any experience with students thinking through things like that.
And at the end of that, I would say, welcome to the real world, right? Because one of the things that happens also is if the surrounding districts don't go on the same schedule, it impacts
Yeah.
sports and all sorts of other stuff. But
Yeah.
I'll give you an example that where I would encourage you not to shut kids down before you hear them out. We had a group of students in a middle school, and it was a K-8 IB school. I had never heard of such a thing. And so it was an international baccalaureate K-8 school. Like and I now know they exist, but they were doing it during their advisory, so they were doing it over an entire semester. And so they want to talk about dress code. All right, I had to like have my hand like this so my eyes wouldn't roll. Right, dress code. Oh my gosh, no, really. My inclination would be to shut that down. However, their take on it was that the dress code was being applied inequitably between boys and girls. And I went, okay. And they did a bunch of research, including contacting the high schools to see what they were doing about dress code violations. And what they found is that boys were cited more often than girls, but girls were given some more severe punishments. And so this was like toward the end of the pandemic. And so I was attending this presentation on Zoom. And I happened to be talking to the superintendent of that district the night before and happened to mention that there was going to be a school board member there and a couple of high school principals and whatever. And I really didn't do it to make her go to the session, but she did. And the kids got up and talked about, what they found, talked about how they wish they hadn't procrastinated. That's probably one of the most important things these kids learn in this project. But what happened at the end caused the entire class, their mouths dropped. I mean, I wish I'd been in the room, because at the end of that, after these adults pushed them on, what would you do about this or what about that, and they were just really pounding them, the superintendent said, this is going to come up at our next meeting. We're going to fix this. And just like that, it was done. And they all just kind of sat there, looked at each other, then they all cheered. It was like one of the best moments ever. But there have been other issues that have taught me just to be quiet for a while and let the kids work it out. Let them work it out. And give them the direction where they need it, in terms of, no, that you don't want to talk to your congressman about a crosswalk, you might want to talk about the city, that kind of stuff. But let them work it out. Chances are they're going to develop something that will be quite surprising.
All right, last question, and then we can certainly move on. But I do want to raise Teresa's question, because this is a good logistical question for everyone to just be aware of. So Teresa is asking, Cheryl, you're often making reference to projects being a whole class project, but then she's asking, in her situation, she has a class with several groups working on different problems. And although Teresa, you said which is better, I mean, I guess I would say it's just going to be different if you have a whole class working together versus small groups of students. So Cheryl, can you speak to that a little bit? What would be the benefit of doing a whole class versus the small groups, and vice versa?
I think that the whole class way of doing it was a good learning experience for me initially, because I kind of had control of all the groups as they were working, right? And one of the things about these projects that we do through the Center for Civic Ed, both this and We the People, is it's a learning experience for the teacher also. And so that is really helpful in terms of how you manage your own learning and what you get out of it. If you've got kids that are ambitious and they're willing to take on every segment of the project and they're going off in a different direction, go for it. I mean, I think that you are the deliverer of the information. You are the person who knows your class better than anyone else. You know, obviously there's more things for kids to do if they're in a smaller group. But if you have kids that you're having to bring along because maybe they're not as accomplished or as passionate about it, there's places you can put them that will cause them to catch on fire or not. Because, you know, we try to do this for every single kid and it doesn't always happen. And you may change your mind from year to year, depending on the nature of your class. Yes.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's great. And I'll just put out there as well that, you know, when it comes to projects that can be submitted at the national level, it does not matter if it is a small group project or a whole class project. We are happy to see projects of any group of kids.
Can I ask one
Yes.
quick question
Sure.
though on the formatting of it? My students and I have been like going back and forth on this. Based on the materials that I received, I'm still not clear. When they are finished their portfolios, so let's say this is going for some competition like state level, what is the requirement? Like I was always under the impression that they had a choice between the posters or like the poster portfolio, the binder, or an electronic version of it, or a combination. What is the usual format for this?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. You've actually queued up
Yes.
very nicely. I will
Segue.
head to promo the next time. That is also a choice that you can make as the instructor. So you can produce a physical portfolio that would be like the multi-panel portfolio that includes a physical binder that includes the students' you know, interviews, the students' reflections, student research. The physical one is totally appropriate and you can submit it that way. The electronic version would be, you know, just that. The students could produce a PowerPoint, they could produce a website. We would not expect them to produce a physical binder to go with an electronic portfolio. We would instead suggest that there is either a supplementary document or a supplementary page on the student's website where they're listing their sources, they're listing their, you know, additional research that they've done, and then their reflections on the project as well. So either one is a-okay.
I used to have the kids do an MLA citation page at the end. Please, 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 please do not skip the reflection. That is not only important for you to understand what worked and what didn't. Most of the time it's gushing, thank you, thank you, thank you. But it's also important for us to see it. And if you have, even if you don't submit the portfolio, if you have reflections that are good suggestions or, you know, just things that we did well, we'd really like to see it. Okay, so, you know, what to expect. Your students will learn the steps on how to influence public policy, and they're also the steps that adults use. And if they used all of the steps, they would be more successful. You know, you'll see examples of effective advocacy, and your students will surprise you. You may not be successful in getting things implemented in some cases, and this is something that we talked about. You know, some cases subsequent classes will take on the same problem because it's such a large problem that maybe class 1 got to this point, but the next class think it's so important that they should continue it. And the students might come upon a solution that it was actually implemented. The ACETA award winner from Montana in 2008 had a 5th grade class, and that 5th grade class did some research about something else and realized that the pipe that was running through the valley underneath the school was so old that it was compromised and it could flood the valley. And they actually brought that to the attention of the county supervisors, who went, oh no, and actually got federal funds to fix it. And that was not what they were looking for. That was just what they came upon in their research about other stuff. So, all right. So, my otter, whatever that is covering up part of my screen. So, Emily, would you read what I just have up there by James Madison? You
Of
can.
course, I will quote Madison anytime. Knowledge will forever.
Okay. Yes.
And a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power knowledge gives.
You can only do something about something if you're willing to learn about it and take action. Uh, this is, I think, one of the most important things that I can give students is to let them know that they do have power, that that their voices count, that in a democracy, it's not just about who can vote; it's also about people who live here, and that their issues are as important as anyone else's. I think you'll see a lot of things. I think you'll see a lot of things now with schools that will talk about mental health in terms of how to, make sure kids are taken care of. But their issues are real, and sometimes we end up helping a whole bunch of people by just paying attention to them. And I am not overly exaggerating when I tell you that these programs, Project Citizen, and also later on We the People, are things that changed my life as a teacher in terms of how I looked at students, how I assigned work, the way I listened to them, how I explained things. It was a very positive influence on me, and I hope it is for you all too.
Thank you, Cheryl. There's a good exchange happening in the chat, and I do want to just, raise it for the benefit of the recording. So the question or comment really arose that students really struggle sometimes with the self-reflection portion, and they either don't know what to say or they can be very, very hard on themselves.
Mm.
And the suggestion from Kathleen, which I think is great, and maybe you can add on, Kathleen has added that you could consider giving students prompts like, what did you learn about working with other people? What did you learn about your project subject matter? What did you learn about yourself? And what might you have learned about timelines and getting things done? Which I think thank you, Kathleen, those are great suggestions, because some of them have less than to do with like the students reflecting on themselves, which of course middle school students can be really tough on themselves. And maybe asking them to think more about the process piece and reflect on the process. So
I would add two other things to that. I would also ask them, what was the hardest part of this? Because oftentimes they think it's one thing and it's not. And then I would also ask them, tell me somebody in the class who did a wonderful job and why. Like, were they helpful to you? Because they're more gushy about their classmates than they are about themselves. Teresa?
Yeah, that was my question. So what I found, because I did that today, as a matter of fact,
Mm-hmm.
I have 3 different classes and they're all like grouped differently. Like I have like 5 different groups all working on 5 different problems, and that's just what my days consist of. So yeah, it can be a real challenge. But I did just that. I pulled out the documentation that I had received, and I pulled out some of those sample prompts, and I created like a Google form, and I said, here, this is what I'd like you to do. But unfortunately, and I don't know if COVID is to blame for, the fact that some kids dealt with being very isolated from their peers. And, there's a lot of things that I like our students just are, how can I put it, delayed, I guess.
One of the things, I don't mean to interrupt you, but one of the things that I would mention, because I hear what you're saying, and I retired in 2015 and went back and taught part-time during COVID, which taught me a lot about kids. But we have a student board member on the Center for Civic Ed board. It's a former student of mine, and she's a Rhodes Scholar from the University of Santa Cruz. There's never been a Rhodes Scholar from UC Berkeley, let alone UC Santa Cruz. I mean, it just doesn't happen. And she called me when she got it. And she told me about a conversation that we had during a reflection where she said, I said to her, I don't remember this at all. It sounds like something I'd say, but I don't remember it. I said, you have good character. You're very responsible, you're ethical, and kids respect you. And that changed the way she looked at herself. And when she told me that, I mean, I'm sobbing because, I said those things because I meant them. But the point that I'm making here is that maybe as a pattern for the reflection, you could start out by saying, here's what I've seen you do that you didn't think you could do.
That's what
And,
I'm doing in my
yeah,
feedback.
yeah.
That's what I'm
And
doing in my feedback.
I might even do it if next time, maybe do it before. Here's what I've seen you do. This is you thought this was so hard and look how far you've come. It's amazing what affirmation from a teacher will do. And the kid may not even react to you, but they remember it years later. That is, again, that's what makes a teacher's life special, is that you can make or break a kid.
Well, and that's what we find that we're spending our entire day doing, is trying to build up these kids and get them to realize that, of course, you can do these things. And I'm not just talking in this class, I'm talking in everything that they do, because they look at everything as, oh, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're struggling with all day long.
And what did
And
they
so,
hear from their parents when they were at home? I can't do this.
well,
I can't help you with this. I can't, because they were
and
also
that's,
overwhelmed. Yeah.
well, and not just that, but if we look at the dynamics of the community that I'm teaching in, unfortunately, that is also what they hear a lot of. There's a lot of issues. So that's what we're working with too.
I'm excited for all of you to do this. I really, I used to say actually out loud, is that this was way more fun. I don't know why people pay me to do this, but I'm having a blast. And when I was teaching, and I did enjoy paying my bills and making sure my kids had shoes on their feet. But this is, to see kids succeed in this arena, and to hear, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy too. All of a sudden, the people in town that are the movers and the shakers and the Rotary Club members know who you are because they've heard from your kids. And so when I would go out to the community to need help, I had no problem getting it because I had done the prep work before. And actually, I didn't do the prep work. The kids did the prep work for me. I mean, they knew who I was because the kids had done such a wonderful job. And so it does reap rewards even if the project isn't successful, in the sense that the outcome is successful. The project itself is obviously successful. So what do y'all think? Any other questions? Or
Please, any other questions? Please go right ahead and jump in.
This is like this is my highlight for today. As soon as I'm off this phone call, I have 3 interdistrict transfers and a board meeting that I'm zooming into. So
Oh my.
this really was the most fun I was having today, believe me.
All right. Well, not seeing any hands, we might go ahead then and wrap things up for this session. And I'll remind everybody, our final session will be the 28th of November. And we will get into much more detail about the portfolio. So yeah, we're going to dive into a physical portfolio versus an electronic portfolio, and kind of some best practices that you can explore with your students for each one. So thank you all for your time this evening. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for sharing. And
my pleasure. My pleasure.
We are, just so excited to have all of you working on this and working through this with us. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time. So if you have anything else you want to ask, privately, we can stick around afterwards as well. So,
well, and people, you can give them my contact information if they want to get a hold of me directly.
Will do. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.